Good evening, Rhea. I'm Nilima Bhatt, your host for this podcast called Truth and Reconciliation Work Dialogues, uh, TRW for short. We have been running this event both online and on ground since the year 2020, around the full moon of July, which is called Guru Purnima. It was inspired as a way to help heal the collective trauma across cultures and societies around the world, and to lead inclusive peace. Um, and we were deeply troubled by what happened with the George Floyd killings. And since then, I mean, we were in COVID at that time. So there was also a lot of pain around the migration that took place with the laborers, day laborers who had no jobs anymore, and how many suffered on their way home and died. And there was a lot of trauma that came up during that time as well. And some of it has yet to be addressed from COVID, but certainly our historical traumas are so many. And we could be running this Truth and Reconciliation Week for several years before we would have addressed and acknowledged all of them from around the world in our human history, right? So today's session is based on the theme of the whole week for this year, which is The Land Keeps the Score, Healing Ideology Impacted Histories. And our guest today is Rhea D'Souza, who is the founder of One Design, a beautiful space for personal and collective awakening, self-exploration, personal mastery, and many such beautiful themes in Mumbai. She's also the founder of Kabila Consulting, and she's very much a reference point for me and many I know who really value her insight and the integrity with which she holds life and the human condition. So thanks, Rhea, for joining us. And I know you've chosen a very interesting theme for today. It's called Borders Beneath My Skin, Holding the Weight of War, Migration, and Inherited Grief. So maybe just say a welcome to our viewers and listeners, Rhea.
Yeah, thank you, Nilima. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting this space as a response. One of the things I have learned about grief that it is anything but passive. Grief is not passive. It's full, and it shows up in ways that we are not accustomed to thinking of it. And so this dialogue, I feel, is one such space where it gets its due. So thank you. Thank you for doing this.
I want to give a little bit of context, so that you can pick up. It's so beautiful, the wound of Kashmir, and the refugees who were the Kashmiri Pandits who had to leave because of the ethnic cleansing that took place there. Their pain, their grief. And then we also held the pain and grief of the Kashmiri Muslims who stayed behind and who then faced the repercussions of at a the government then has to do what it has to do, and the armed forces step in. And there's grief all around. As we know, in any conflict, there are no winners ultimately, right? So we began with Kashmir and holding the grief of both sides, those who stayed and those who left. And what does it mean to be a refugee, a migrant in your own land? We had Juanita Robertson yesterday talk about the grief of slavery held in the USA and how those ancestors of those who were enslaved await that grieving. So in a way, their souls also can be at peace and healed. we've had some very, very interesting dialogues. Yesterday, we had Iris Sadeh, who just at a personal level, she is in Israel, she's an Israeli Jew, and she just shared her grief without judging anybody, right? Just asked us to witness her grief and her truth with what is going on in Israel and Gaza. Um, we have had Elena talk about the inherited wound that goes from one generation to the next and how that needs to be acknowledged. So we've had Rwanda and, what happened, how the land continues to hold the grief and how there are brave people there who are seeking to acknowledge what happened so we can move on. Today's session is interesting because I think you're going to bring us into a very different lens and way in which to even process and unpack ideology impacted histories or even things that have happened through, acts of God, so to speak, such as COVID, right? So maybe just a few opening remarks from you, Rhea, with your story of what happened to you during COVID.
Okay. Yeah. I think grief is such a response to the broken bond of belonging, again and again. And at the same time, we have this inherited fear of exile. I want to share this story of COVID times, and it so happened that I was by myself that period. And I lived in an apartment which had a sea view. So on a constant basis, the ocean was right there, full. And around that time, this whole migration thing happened. Workers were asked to leave, and they were leaving. And the place in Mumbai where I live, in Bandra, there was this news of how 5,000 people were sleeping on the tracks because they thought the trains wouldn't be working and they were run over. And I couldn't stop crying, thinking, here I am staying in this apartment who has been built by some of these people who now suddenly had no place of their own. On their way to their home, some of them died. And it was just extremely painful. And I felt helpless and angry and not knowing what to do. But like, even as I speak, my heart is thumping as I speak. There was, and I tried calling people, calling friends and saying, can we do something? And I reached out to some of my clients and saying, we can't just sit here and not do anything. We must do something. And so, of course, we ended up putting some funds together to organize for a truck and so on. And then one night I was sleeping, and we had to do all our work ourselves and so on. And I woke up in the middle of the night and to go to the bathroom. And I was like, my eyes are still shut, I'm still sleepy. And on my way back, my feet hurt little, something. But I was too sleepy, I didn't bother to really check. When I woke up in the morning, I had blisters on the soles of my feet. I could not walk. I had not stepped, of course, anywhere. Nobody could step out anywhere. And somehow the blisters from all these people who were walking found its way to my feet. There's no way to explain this in any logical format. But I remembered that I live in Mumbai, but I'm also a refugee. My ancestry goes all the way to Portuguese, and then beyond that to the Jews. And I remembered and I felt what it must have been to walk 40 days and 40 years and 40 nights in the desert, and what that must have felt like. And somehow this time suddenly sort of collapsed into this one moment of, I am those people and those people are me, and I am the land and the land is me. So it's not, it was very disorienting and painful. This wasn't the first time, but this was the first time it manifested physically on my body, like literally.
May I share something here?
Yeah.
The connection to the call with Rashi Bunny, who was one of our speakers, and her theme was telomere healing for releasing land-based trauma. And it felt something from another dimension, a futuristic thing almost, where she's talking about how telomeres are in our DNA, our RNA, and how they somehow hold these imprints, and they can also heal these imprints, right? That the DNA comes across generations, and it's a shared history in a way. Before we started this call, you were telling me about how someone who passed away in your family, and do you want to just share that thing, that the realization that two people
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So my aunt, my oldest uncle's wife, when she was 89, and she passed away day before, and we went for the prayer meeting to this cemetery, and there were these 28 people standing there, plus the spouses. So their four children, and then their children, and then their children, and with these two tombs in the backdrop, my uncle and aunt. Uncle passed away a few years earlier, and I couldn't, because I don't know if it was the silence and nobody around and just these people. And from my vantage point, I was thinking, two people caused this 28 people to show up on this earth. If these two people were not there, where would this 28 have been at this point in time, And then from there on, it's like a forward. Where does it go? Where does it go? It's some years ago. I mean, this thing started, I think, about 20 odd years ago for me, when one fine day I was meditating. It was just one of those things. And I suddenly had flashes of war. Like the smell, I could taste blood, the coppery taste of blood. And it's, there's nothing to entice that. It's not like I read it or I saw TV, nothing. From out of nowhere, this images, and then the pain that I felt in my body, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I started to howl with pain and cry, and I called up a couple of my friends, and I don't know how to explain that, except that it is happening. It's happening in my body, and they didn't know what to do, and they learned then to just be quiet and let me just cry it out, and then it would subside after about 45 minutes or so. And then I would come to know a couple of days later, a couple of hours later, about some news of war somewhere in the world. Like many days, my body feels like the earth. Like if it happens somewhere, I know it. My body knows, my mind comes to know much later.
So you're making a very, very powerful point here, which seems so completely bizarre and yet a deeper truth, that not just the body keep the score of what has happened to it, but the body is also the land, the earth, and the body can keep the earth score and the score of generations before us as well. So it's also a timeline that is held in us across our ancestors. And it's also a broader reality of what's happening right now that can also be felt in each of us.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it also makes sense if you think about it, right? Like, I am, dust thou art and dust thou return it too. I came from this land. So if I have a gene, if I'm allowed to say I got diabetes because my father had diabetes because he passed it on, then it is the same logic. I come from this earth, so the earth's DNA must live inside me, wouldn't it? Right?
So it's interesting. You represent one of the, you're not the mainstream, but you're certainly not among the completely one-of-a-kind people I am seeing more of these days. It's like there is a group of you on walking the planet these days that seem to be carrying a different truth, a different reality, working and living at a much deeper, wider level in the human experience. So will you share a little bit about your origin story? Because maybe there are some clues there.
My origin story. I'm with. I'm always like struck to say from where do I begin. It's one of those things. But I have a birth story, and then I have an origin story, and they are two different stories. So my birth story is I'm the second child. My mom had when she was very young. She was 15 when she gave birth to a stillborn. And then because of that shock and trauma, she was not able to conceive for many years after that. And so, so I was born in a Christian family and very staunchly Christian at that. But somehow when wanting a child happened, my parents and my grandparents were willing to go beyond the boundaries of just Christianity, do whatever as long as we get a child. It was one of those moments. So they prayed to other gods, and whoever said anything, everybody was trying anything they could think of, or whoever told them, just to get a child. And at one point in time, my aunt, who's also no more, she passed away early this year. She had a friend, Dr. Trivedi, who were followers of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Now, I didn't know these names. I really did not know. I knew that my mom would take me later to their dispensary because he was our family doctor. And where he would sit, I still remember behind him were these two giant big poster pictures. And from my vantage point, they looked big. And then Trivedi doctor would sit and eventually give me these little white some tablets just to. But before my birth, his daughter was doing some research at the Aurobindo Institute, I think somewhere in the US. And they were coming up with some experimental medicine method. I don't know what. But it was experimental and very expensive. And so he said, why don't you try this? My mom was 6 months. I think that medication is supposed to start at 6 months pregnancy. They said, look, we are doing this, but since it's experimental, we would also want to know what happens later on, And so they said, it's expensive medicines, but we will waive off the cost, provided you give us the baby after birth, after a few months after the birth, so we can research to figure out what happens to the medicine later on. I think in the heat of the moment, everybody said yes. And then I was born on 30th November. And everybody, of course, celebrated. And my lineage also comes from Jewish origins. And my aunt, at that moment in time, my godmother was in Jerusalem at the time that I was born. And so she was in this church like place, and she picked up my name. My Christian name is Joanne. And after that, they refused to give me to anyone. So I don't know what happened. And a couple of my friends who know this story, this is the first time I'm sharing it like this with people. She would keep pestering me to find out what is that, what was that. And then for whatever reason, I have stayed away from asking more questions about that. I don't know why. I do know much later, I think after I met you actually, Nilima, that the mother passed away in the same month that I was born in 1973. And so I don't know what is the connection, but that's the story of my birth.
So you're born in 1973?
Yes, 30th November 1973.
Yeah, the mother left her body on 17th November 1973. And this thing about that you would be given to some institute in the US doing research, how does that even work? I mean, given means you were supposed to be handed over as a baby, or that you would continue to live with your parents, but they would be participating in some kind of research about your growth and development?
So no, I think it was that they would take me over for X number of years, I think 12 years or 18 years or some such, and then study, you know. But very early on, I remember I had extremely vivid dreams. And but I didn't know they were dreams. I thought they were just people, like Sai Baba, for example, amongst many other people. Sai Baba would be a very often, like I'm talking to you, I would talk. In my mind, there was no differentiation between, oh, this is God and this is not like that, or please. So there was already too much of other things happening for me to even want to find out about more things. So, of course, they said that they would return me to my parents after X number of years. So I think that's what it was. But no, I was not given. But
The experimental thing that you were your mother was given, was it?
yes,
What was it?
some medication she had to take from there on oral, I think, to help the baby. I don't know, something like that. Because she was just not able to. She had a couple of miscarriages before me. She's just, her body was too traumatized by that stillbirth to allow life to come forth. I mean, I'm a doula now and I can understand that today in a very different way. So,
So you said there are two stories, the origin story and the birth story. Which one was this?
this was the birth story.
Okay. What's
The
the
birth
origin
story.
story?
Well, the origin story, interestingly, growing up, I was raised, even though I come from a Christian family with my grandmother, I was exposed to all faiths. We celebrated Eid, Diwali, like literally everything. So I didn't identify, but some years ago, I think some 10, 12 years ago, I was in a lab, in a group relations lab, and it's an emergent theme that comes out, and I had forced a couple of my friends to come along and attend because I find group work extremely important and valuable, more than individual work. So, anyways, some context happened, and somebody was mentioning about being marginalized, and there was a big debate, and I was like, I have been marginalized. I have experienced what it means to be marginalized. Because my name is Rhea D'Souza, and often people, when I would go looking for houses to rent out, people would read Rhea as Reha, which sounds like a Muslim name, and suddenly houses which were available were made not available. And I didn't want to correct my name, but I would, like a very fundamental level, I had this: how can you make these distinctions like that? So. But then, I mean, this was not the main piece. But then these friends, colleagues, they came to me and said, you know what? You never say Rhea D'Souza, I'm Rhea D'Souza. You always say I'm Rhea. And I began to think about it, and it was true. But why didn't I, right? I had sleepless nights, many sleepless nights, wondering, why did I not say D'Souza? And then I had to go deep down to say, there is this inherited rage and shame around some of my ancestors forcibly converted other people, right? And so freedom has then been a very, very integral value for me, with good intentions, of course, always with good intentions, right? But I felt by not saying the name, I could distance somehow, and I was wrong. And then when that thing started to happen, I began to trace my journey backwards. You know, I come from Goa, my parents were from Goa, and from there to Portugal. So I took a trip to to Portugal to walk the roads that my great great ancestors must have walked. Um, I'm also an artist, and I could see where it comes from. The streets of Portugal are full of art. But I also went through, I think it is called the Dark History Walk or some such it is called. It happens only in the night, and they tell you things which popular tourist stuff don't tell you, and the stuff that the Portuguese did to the world. And I, I hold that as well, right? The pain, the torture, the all of those things, right? So the war lives inside of me, and I hold both these things. They were also me. They were not somebody else, right? And so, for better or for worse, they were also me. The people that killed were also me, and I can feel that pain as well.
The forced conversions,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So talking about the land keeps a score, right there is Goa. There was a Hindu Goa before there became a Portuguese Goa.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Hindus had to flee into the mountain, the hill area and resettle there. Otherwise, they would either be killed or tortured, terrible, terrible things, and those histories. And people seem to just move on and not necessarily do truth and reconciliation around what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just as the land keeps the score of that which lies unhealed as a history, then the bodies continue to keep that score as well, like in a Rhea D'Souza.
It does. I think land. I mean, there is. I want to read this one piece, which I've always find. This is by Paul Shepard. He said this: the grief and sense of loss that we often interpret as a failure in our personality is actually a feeling of emptiness, where a beautiful and strange otherness should have been encountered. And we make it hyper personal sometimes. Um, and it is personal, but it is not only personal. These That kind of hurt land, like I would always think about India, and the north of India and the south of India are so different temperamentally, right? Temperamentally, like in the north of India, there is just this fight in some form or way. Like there's always, let's get there, let's do this. And the south of India is more relaxed in, pursuing music and arts. And I've always wondered what, until when you go there and you walk and you feel the aridness in the air. And India has most times been attacked in the north. So historically, that land tells its people to be on guard. Whereas the south of India has more ocean and hasn't been attacked from there so much. So you can relax and then pay attention to other things. So even though we may not know, but our bodies know, and our bodies will speak if we listen.
Yeah, you're making a very beautiful point for people who are not from India to understand why North India is so different from South India. And you're absolutely right. I'm curious about you, since you know your ancestry. Uh, were your ancestors Hindus at some point in Goa?
Well, in all of my, it took me like 2.5, 3 years to trace back, ask people, ask my ancestry. And the story goes all the way back to 12th century. I mean, the earliest that I found through all kinds of means, where now my great, 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 some level great grandmother married my grandfather, great, great grandfather. And they were Hindus, and she was very beautiful. This was during the Prithviraj Chauhan reign, and he was this mighty king, and so on. And the story that I discovered, which is the origin story, at least from my understanding, hundreds of years ago, that my great great granda was a doctor, and she was married to him, and she was beautiful, very pretty. And somehow this king asked to marry her, and she was, of course, she was not willing or ready. She's like, I'm already married. But back then you could marry, the kings could marry more women, but she wasn't, you know. And so they had to flee. So they took some ship somewhere and went to Portugal, some ship that was going. And they discovered, now in Hinduism at that time, you could have, for various other reasons, because, there were war widows and people wanted to do. But over there, they found out in Christianity, you could only marry once and nobody could forcibly get you married to somebody else. So to keep their love and their marriage sacrosanct, they converted to Christianity.
Wow.
When I heard that, Nilima, like the guilt, the shame, the fear, the rage of this conversion just melted away. When you trace back far enough, I think it starts with love. It's a love story which we just moved on and on and on. Having said that, I also want to say, I mean, I discovered this in one of the past life regression, one of these many labs. When I discovered this, in psychodrama actually, I realized how for the longest period I did not want to be seen as beautiful.
Mm.
Like I was a tomboy most of my life, right? And of course, I could explain away from, oh, but I love sports and I could do that. But deep down, there was this thing of, if I'm seen, then what if there is this danger? Right? And I had to work through all of that, to choose what I wanted from my ancestors and say, this story stops here. It doesn't need to go any further. I've seen it for what it is, and now it can rest. Right? I have been a witness to my ancestors' story, and the land that it had to leave because they didn't feel safe. Right? And then at some point, of course, they came back and more things happened. But yeah,
I'm getting goosebumps as you're sharing, Rhea, because it's almost as if we are the land made conscious, we are the land made human, and we are those same humans who were the ancestors who seem to come back again and again and again until someone in the lineage reconciles. They say, the body is a self-healing system, and so must be the land and the earth. And so it continues across lifetimes until that which lies misqualified, incoherent, is returned to coherence and truth. And that gets worked out, those knots get worked out in us, in our bodies. And you just happen to be someone who is more sensitive and self-aware enough to see the process have taken place in you. Not everyone may know it. As you say, the minds may not know it, but what if all our bodies are just cauldrons, crucibles in which truth and reconciliation takes place regardless whether we know it or not, and it happens over lifetimes?
Yeah. Yeah. We've, I think when we hug, a lot of my friends laugh at me because I'm one of those long huggers. I'm just a hugging person. When you hug, you kind of feel this. You can feel the movement of memories, movement of shared spaces. Um, anyway, but I guess I think sometimes it needs grief um, as much as it needs joy to
So
be
this
able
is
to.
something I have been seeing, been doing work with cancer and, really been seeing people through their most difficult and challenging lives. And the realization that all healing lies on the other side of grieving. It's like you cannot heal. The last rung you have to climb is
Yeah,
grief. You can go through everything, rage, shame, guilt, everything. You can process all those negative emotions, but there's no healing until you grieve. And what feels very strange is it's almost like people do not want to touch that wound because it feels so scary to touch grief, to feel grief, that people would rather, it's like touching a hot iron, You take people till that moment, but when they touch that, they just, and they do not want to go there. They will circle around it. And I have seen people who went to their graves instead of heal and grieve.
yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. I mean, we are not taught to grieve. We are taught to celebrate. We are not taught to, we don't have vocabulary. We don't have, sorrow can be so eloquent um, when it has the right notes. And, but like Juanita, one of the things she says is shame and guilt is just unprocessed grief. And grief is just love with no place to go.
And on that, she says, when she talks about slavery, she says, we all carry the slave archetype in us in one form or the other. We are either the slave, the enslaved, or we are the slave owner, right? We are like, and they are not two different things.
Mm-hmm.
They are the same archetype, which has two sides.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the colonizer and the colonized, like you're talking about what you're holding inside you, right? The oppressor and the oppressed,
Yeah.
the Hindu and the Christian, who came to colonize and convert. But then who really oppressed whom in your story, right? And so, yeah, can you speak to how you have experienced being both until you were able to reconcile these polarities within?
I'm not sure. Okay. I think reconciliation is knowing it is a polarity and will always remain such. That is the reconciliation. And that I am this and I am that. I am the oppressor and I am the oppressed, and I will keep moving and swinging in the infinity. And because I feel like, and I've been through that journey as well, where there was this other and he was this guy and he did that and they did that, and as long as I kept doing that, they stand on the same land as I stand. So if they fall, I feel the thud as well. Right? The the grief in the heart and the rage in the jaws, and then the silence in the bones. Right? Is such a felt thing. And it's not too long a far-fetched thing to say, how in some other context, maybe with an animal, maybe with a plant, I have been exactly like that, isn't it? So this anthropocentric view of the world is the otherness that we end up doing. That evolution didn't come to a stop with human beings arriving, right? The picture of evolution in our history books is a story which is just perpetuating this divide. And I feel like a lot of pain around that. In his book Ishmael, I forget his name now, the author, but he talks about this. That evolution, we tell the story, which is why the story of the beginning is a very tricky question. Like, do I talk myself as species? Because then in that sense, I'm just evolving. But we talk about human beings' evolution as the story of evolution. It's one of the species, right? As just because we have evolved, has evolution stopped? I mean, if you look around, new species, look at COVID. A whole new species just is thriving. Of course, it is evolving. Yeah, but that is the other divide. That we think nature is out there and I'm a human being and not seeing me as nature. So when these trees get cut, I go through such terrible pain and nightmares when trees get cut. Like I can smell when trees get cut, there's a smell in the air. Like my eyes burn with that smell, like this, something in the air. And I know trees are being cut somewhere.
So coming back to this creature that you are, criatura, you seem to be a human in a human body, but clearly you experience more than the regular human experience. So since we enjoy the mythopoetic lens, you are a poet, you're a writer, and we also understand the power of mythos to make meaning. So for today's theme and session and exploration, can you also count the story? When you told me your birth story, I was remembering Rumpelstiltskin, like a child promised, but then reneged on, and then the consequences of that. Can you briefly tell that story and then let's unpack?
Yeah, I mean, Rumpelstiltskin is the story of once there's a kingdom and there is one regular sort of person, and he wants to be in the king's court, and get all the respect, etc. And the king says, I don't really need you because we have everything that we need, and so nothing special, so thank you very much. And that man says, no, I have something special. And the king says, what is it? So he says, my daughter can make gold out of hay. Straws of hay, she can weave gold. And that's special. And the king is, of course, he doesn't know anybody else who does that. So he says, fine. Okay, if that is so, then you can come into my kingdom. But I'm going to put it to test. I'm going to get your daughter to do that. And so he puts this daughter in this, like a barnyard and says, you have the whole night, please weave and make gold out of this. And she has no idea how to do this. She doesn't have that. It is one father's some lie and promise for something that he wanted. And he gives a word for his daughter, which is not his to give to first to start with. But then it's not true either. And she is upset. And I think there's something about, how grace holds the innocent. I think I've seen that theme play out time and again for many people, right? Because she's innocent, somehow there is this little creature that comes and says, why are you crying, and so on. And she says, this is what has happened, and I have zero idea what to do. There's a spinning wheel, and so he says, don't worry, I will do that, but what will you give me in return? And she says, I don't have anything. She has a mother who's passed away, her little chain, and he says, I'll give you that. And so he does it, and then he gets the chain, and same thing happens the second night. King is overjoyed, but also now greedy. And he says, okay, one more. And then she gives him something else, and the third time she has nothing to give. And so she's crying, and then he says, "What will you give me this time?" And she says, "I have nothing to give." And he says, "No, but you do. You give me your firstborn." She's in desperate situation, so she says yes. And he converts everything to gold, and the king is now happy. And then he gets married, and they get the first son, and then now she doesn't want to give. Right? Lot like my story. And then Rumpelstiltskin comes, and of course she doesn't know his name. And he says, "Look, I'll give you one more chance. If you guess my name in 3 days, I will go back." You know, and so on and so forth. And she doesn't know, and she doesn't know, and she comes up with all the names, and she tells everybody else in the room, quote, to say, "I am on this." And I think that's her genius, that she doesn't try to do it herself. She entails everybody's help, right? And so on day 2, some guard comes and says, "I was going through the garden and I saw this little creature who was dancing," and he says his name, and I think that's his name. So that's how it happens, and she says the name. So that's the story. But yeah.
What I picked up in that is this thing about wanting to be special. The father has a need to be special and to enter the court, and not able to accept his ordinariness, and in the process giving away a daughter who is not his to give. And the king's greed and the kind of double-edged sword, the king saying, "If your daughter can't spin hay into gold, she dies. But if she spins it, I will marry her." Right? So there is that strange inequity, injustice as well, right? So yeah, how? And then Rumpelstiltskin, who comes and does his genius, but he too has a stake in the game, which is unfair, to take a child away from its mother. Every time I heard this story, it felt wrong to me at every level. Including him being denied in the end. Like, he did his part of the bargain, which is he spun the hay into gold. And okay, his mistake or wrong was to ask for a child of a mother, but then she did the deal and she reneged on it. And on the other hand, she had no choice because she would have been killed. So it's such a weird story of, so let's sit with that and unpack it. And I don't know if there is a clue in this about your body then becoming what it became and the price you are paying.
Yeah.
In your body now. The child who lived and wasn't given away.
Yeah.
You carry the karma.
What happened to that child, isn't it? And what would have happened if Rumpelstiltskin had taken the child? For years, I mean, I thought, from every character's side, when I see the story, they feel right. I mean, Rumpelstiltskin honored. In many ways, he was better than the father, right? At least he kept his word and was truthful, right? But then the father just wanted to belong. I mean, that's the grief, right? Like, when unprocessed grief can come out in all kinds of ways. Like, he wanted to belong that he was willing to sort of push the daughter under the bus, in a way.
Does it need to be special? Do I need to be special to belong?
I think belonging makes you feel special. But people get it the other way around. People think, if I become special, then I will belong, rather than to think. And I think this goes back to how Darwin has been misinterpreted as saying survival of the fittest, which then makes you want to be special, fittest. But I happen to have his first edition somehow, and in that he writes survival of the fit. Survival of the fit, which is belonging. When you fit into your environment, then you can survive. And all of nature is like that. But for years now, we've been saying survival of the fittest. That's the seed story, isn't it? But it's like diametrically opposite in terms of what unfolds. Survival of the fit is belonging, fitting, being in a community. But survival of the fittest, which is not true, wants to stand out, wants to be special, and then feels left out. And so
creates the unhealthy competition, which in a way destroys the tribe that holds you.
Yeah. And we're never stopping to understand, okay, if you are fittest and you will run and win the race, and then what? How are you going to survive without people around you? Like, we just don't pause long enough to feel what we are saying and perpetuate it. Nothing survives on its own.
There's something about the grief is also the core wound of separation from our oneness, right? From the fact that we never unbelonged, that we actually never left the oneness, that we cannot leave the ground of being, which is oneness, but we experience the falsehood or the illusion of having been separated. And that leads to such a profound pain and grief that everything else unfolds from there. All the distortion, perversion then unfolds.
Yeah. True. And we're fighting our own shadows, so it doesn't matter. Like, we never really, like, how do you win something like that? I think the other common way in which we misread this is we think shadow and darkness is the same thing. And so perhaps that's why we think of it as darkness and run away. I mean, we're taught to fear darkness. But they're so inherently, fundamentally different. Darkness is absence of light, but shadow is the presence of light. You cannot have shadow without light. So when there is a shadow, it is confirming that there is light. So if we just saw it for that, this othering that we do on so many levels, but my sense is that we went through this COVID as a way of, COVID equalized everybody and everything. No nationalities, no age, no socioeconomic ups and downs. Everybody was treated equal by this virus. I think it came for something in some way. But I feel this, at the heart of these wars is an unacknowledged grief, because we go through self-anesthesia and amnesia. Right? We have gotten good at going numb and forgetting. Like, we've forgotten how it was. We've forgotten how COVID was. If one person coughed somewhere, 5 people would get up. Doesn't matter for what reason. You cared for another human being in a very different way. But we've forgotten that. We are back to life as usual. We're very short-lived memories like that.
And there was one Rhea in the population. And that one Rhea could spawn or cause another 14 if 2 could spawn 28 from your recent memory, right? So that is my hope, that the microcosm is the macrocosm, and what can get worked out and resolved, reconciled, and healed in one can somehow mysteriously also then impact the many. And so I think I feel what today's conversation is converging on is not just how you have held your ancestry and Goa and, the Christianity and the Hindus, the Indians and the Portuguese, your body seems to have reconciled that, but also something about migration, colonizations, through COVID. And if we have pain around the fact that humanity did not learn the lesson from COVID, here is one microcosm of humanity called Rhea D'Souza, who somehow seems to have worked it out. And I would like to think I was holding COVID similarly as an opportunity for evolving the species. And this truth and reconciliation movement came out from that time. And so while we hold that as a kind of placeholder to end today's discussion, I think we've opened something beautiful to remember. But we have a nice question from Tanishta. Tanishta, do you want to go ahead, unmute, and just share it?
Okay, yeah. Hi, good evening, ma'am.
Hi.
I wrote it in the chat box. I would read it as it is. So my first question is, um, do you think is wanting to feel special comes from a space of survivalism? This is my first. And second, how can we reconcile grief, doubt about existentialism, and a sense of belonging within the self? Especially like when I don't know what the grief is, but I can feel a lot of pain. There's just pain, and it sometimes make me question my own existence and my belonging in the world.
Mm.
So there is this inner fight, inner dialogue that goes on, and I don't know the answers. So I try to, do some stuff that can keep me at peace. But like conversations like these again make me, question such things that go on within.
Well, Tanisha, I mean, I think I'm going to respond to both your questions because I think they are related. Um, um, there is a question of how do I belong? How can I be special when one has bought into the story that you don't belong and that you're not special? Mhm. And this is what the world sort of does, that there is nobody else like you or me or anyone over here in one way. Right? So there is, I think this special is used as a way to control because somebody decides what that special is. And then you have to work your way into that, towards that in some form or way. Right? But if you gave that up to say, I am special exactly the way I am, exactly the way the other person is, exactly the way the tree is, in your own eyes, in your own way, there is no need for that word even, if there was such a thing. Just like there is no such thing as waste. On one earth, what is waste? Where do you throw it away? Right? It's out of sight, but it's not away. But at the same time, I think we have become a culture of hyper personalization. So when you feel this pain, we somehow force fit into a narrative which is too personal. And we are not able to hold the global and the personal in the polarity that it demands and needs. Right? So we then become too narrow, and that narrow container can't hold the big thing that we end up feeling many times. And in the big container, the small thing gets lost. So back to doing I mean, as a practice to draw that. And there have been cultures, people who do practice belly dancing is this practicing the same infinity movement in the body. When you practice that, you move between these two extremes and still able to hold it without, you can hold the polarities without feeling the need to polarize your views about things. So that's more practically how to hold it response. But yeah, it doesn't go away. I just want to say one thing, like grief is not a speed bump. You don't get over it. It lives inside you and it will show up, and you have to make a sacred altar to keep for the grief as well.
Beautiful, Rhea. I feel like, and this is going to be our call with Andrea tomorrow, the whole Rumi quote that beyond right doing and wrongdoing is a place, I will meet you there. It's as if once we do not reject one pole and prefer the other, if we learn to co-hold the two in that inhale and exhale, in a strange and funny way, we transcend and go beyond into a third place in which these two are now held. And it's something that, we call the third sweet spot. But actually, the answer is not in the two, it's in the third place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the ability to transcend into that third place and stay in that third spot is the only way to live with what happened between the poles, right? Otherwise, we are doomed to feel like we are just stuck in a pattern of, head in the freezer and feet in the oven and wondering, what's my temperature, right? Neither is right in a way, correct? So it's as if we have to transcend to a third place in order to look back and hold the two.
Yeah,
Right?
and not pathologize it, that is the other danger we have, right? It needs presence, not pathology, to see this not as broken, not as small, but to say it is, and we get to co-hold that on behalf of the earth. Yeah.
Wow. So we're 3 minutes past time, but I think it's such a rich and deep conversation, and I'm so grateful for the deeper intelligence, the deeper river which seems to be flowing through this truth and reconciliation work this week and connecting to past years and all the sessions that have happened this week and will continue to happen for the next 2 days on the 15th and 16th of July. It just all feels with such, it's like a step-by-step unfolding. There's a rhythm, there is a logic, there's a magic. So thank you, Rhea, for stepping into your moment in this flow. You've opened many possible doors and dimensions for us to consider about who are we really? What is this body really? What is time? What is space? What is my body? What is the land? Where does one begin? Where does the other end? What is the past? What is the present? What is the future? Right? You've opened many amazing, and who is the good guy and who is the bad guy? Who oppressed whom? I just end by honoring you for showing up at this time in this timeline where all these polarities could somehow collapse into some sort of a outcome. So I'm deeply grateful to you.
Thank you.
Including your origin story and your birth story.
Thank you for just inviting that, and being a witness to this whole thing, really. I think something is shifting and healing even in this conversation, right? I think all that we want and everybody wants is a witness. And I think this has been a witnessing by everyone. So thank you on behalf of everyone.
Thanks to all our listeners. And thanks to Rhea and whoever brought her here for us. So with that, I'm your host, Neelima Bhatt, for this year's Truth and Reconciliation Work Week and the Dialogue podcast that we have launched. Please join us on the podcast, catch the other recordings that will be shared soon. So much love and good night.
Good night.
Bye.